Hi, I hope I find everybody really well and getting on with your tags. It's quite nice doing something each week just to keep you going. So we're on with tag number 4. So like I said, we're going to do every so often, possibly every 4 tags, just focusing on a stitch, just for the love of stitching. So what you're going to need for this one is a little bit of fabric that's going to go obviously onto your tag. Now there's 2 different ways you can do this. I'm just going to work on the piece of fabric, but because we're doing hand embroidery, you might want to put it in a hoop and draw the shape on so that you know where to start stitching. So we're going to do a fly stitch today. So you need to collect together some colours that sort of go with your fabric. You could try different sizes of thread and different types of thread. I'm mainly using pearly threads because I've just got a little bit obsessed using them because they just stitch really nicely. The idea about playing with the stitch is we're not just going to do one stitch. You're going to really play with it. So think about the direction, the shape, the size, how you're going to use it. But we're going to start off first with just the simple stitch. So to get yourself your thread. Now I'm left-handed, so I'm sorry if you're right-handed, but hopefully you'll gather what we're going to do. And we're just going to do a line of the fly stitch just all the way down. So what you want to do is you're going to come up through your fabric, just hold your thread down the fabric, and you're going to create in, and then you're going to come up. So we're creating like a V shape with our needle. This needs to go underneath the needle. So you take that through and it forms a V shape, and then you go down, so you're creating like a Y. Okay, so there's our first stitch. Now we're going to create a line and we're going to do connected stitches. So what you're going to do this time is come up at the side. Again, just hold your thread down. You're going to go back down, but you're going to bring your needle up at the bottom of the stitch. So you go in and then come up at the bottom there. Okay, bring that thread underneath your needle, take it down. Oops. The disadvantage sometimes is they get a little bit twisted. So you've created that other shape and then you go down. Okay, so we're sort of creating our shape. I love this stitch. It's really nice. Now you can change it because we're going to play around with this stitch. So what you can do, bring that up. Oops. If you then got it so twisted on itself, there we go. If you then, rather than going straight down, so rather than going straight down, if you bring this across a little bit, you can start meandering your stitch. This is probably why sometimes it might be a little bit easier to do it in an embroidery hoop, because it just keeps that tension just right. So I've taken that one across to my left. So your needle, oops. Okay, so have your thread going down, needle in, come back up at the bottom of that thread, just pull it, and then keep travelling. So these are connected stitches. Now the other thing then that you can do is play around with the width and the length of each section of your stitch. So I'm going to bring it back round again. So you could bring your V shape really narrow. So you could bring it right in to that upright thread. we go. So you could bring it really narrow. The stem can get longer. So you could have another narrow one. One side could be narrower than the other. So you're bringing it back round. It could be teeny tiny. So it could be a tiny stem. So you can really just play around with them as connected stitches. Okay, so that's number one. I'll just tie this off on the back. This isn't going to be the tag that I'm going to stitch on. I'm just using this as a demonstration piece, and then I'll sit and do my tag and stitch it back on. So one of the other things that you could do if you wanted to, just to add a little bit of something else to your piece, a little bit of interest, you could pop a button on. Now this can either be stitched in place as in permanently, or you could tack it in place and then remove it afterwards so that it leaves a hole in the middle. I don't think it's one of those things you can tack it in, remove it, and then always put it back in. So you're going to use your button as a starting point for your fly stitch. We're going to do separated ones now. Okay, so I'm going to come up at the edge of my button. Oops, I'm tangled up in my other. I'm going to create my V. So I'm going to go back down just a little bit further on from that, and then create a stem going out, and then I'm going to do another one. Okay, so I'm using the button as, I suppose, like a frame to work round. So you're sort of having these radiating out from your button. It does make me giggle when I always talk about how I don't particularly plan things. This particular one, I've been thinking about the stitch in my sleep, coming up with different ideas and different ways that you could use this. Now obviously with this one I would keep the V shapes pretty much the same size, but depending on where you place it on your fabric you can extend. So you could extend the stems right up to the edge of the bit of fabric. Now what will happen then when you remove your button is it'll probably start looking a little bit like a flower. So I'm sort of, hopefully you can see, sorry I keep moving it out of the way. So I've come up there, I'm going back down, so I'm using the button as the guide for going back down. And just try and keep it radiating out from around your button. Okay, so it's going to go all the way around the edge. Oops. There we go. Obviously what you can do then is you can play around with loads and loads of different colours. So you could then do, which I'll do in a second, some fly stitches coming back in. The idea with these tags is you're not going to use any other stitch at all. It is just this stitch, which I think is a really nice thing to do because it pushes you into thinking, well, how could I do this and make it look a bit different or look interesting? So you can add other bits onto your fabric if you want to, but I think I'm going to keep mine just purely about the stitching, because I do think it's good sometimes just to challenge yourself. So the only bits really that'll be of interest or trying to make it interesting will be my colour choices. So I've gone with blues, but I might use some greens as well. But then obviously what you can do is start mixing in other colours. So in the gaps you could do quite big, right, I'm just trying to space this out right. So you could do some really big V's, really big V. Oops. With a tiny stem. And can you see how you can really start them playing around just with the same stitch? And just seeing what you can do with it. So remember, we're not trying to make something, we're just exploring the stitch. Now if you start going to bits where you've already stitched, stitch over them. So here I've got a really big shape, so still go with it, go with the shape, because you still, again, we're still doing exactly the same stitch, we're just taking inspiration from the shape. So you can really play around with a fly stitch. I think I've got, yeah, I think they're all individual, so they're all fly stitches, but they're all really, really individual, just one crossed over, which can be really, really nice to do. So the idea then this month, not this month, what am I talking about, this week, is play. It could just be that you do lots of them and they just all overlap. So if I was going to carry on going all the way around with that, just tie that off on the back. Then I've got to make the decision. I know if I do this now, it'll all fall to pieces, but it just gives you an idea of what things look like. If you do the button, once you put the button on, you do need to knot it at the back, because then the decision that you can have is either leave the button on or you can take it out. Now obviously if I'd not knotted that off, it's going to end up, everything else is going to fall to pieces, but just by having had, where's that going? There. Come on, come. There we go. So just by having that like that, you can create really, really nice shapes, really, really nice shapes just in the middle. Or if you decide, oh, actually I preferred the button, you can go back and pop the button in. So you're going to be working with a fly stitch, lots and lots of different colours. Again, at the end of the video, I'll put some photographs of lots of different examples. So I might finish this one, I might do a couple more, just to give you some different ideas as to how you could tackle this week's challenge. So I really look forward to seeing what everybody does, and I'll see you next week.